let's take a look at what else is making news in the papers and online. And Kathrine Peereboom is a disability advocate and the founder of Spectrum Support. She joins us now. A very good morning. Welcome to the studio. We usually talk to you in a little screen, but it's
we
so
do.
Nice in person.
It is. It's nice to be in studio for a change. Thank you.
Listen, let's start off with this article from the ABC, of course, talking about the federal budget. You know, they sort of go through the ins and outs of what's there, what's not there. But what actually came out of this for me was that while there's a lot of sort of calculation, shall we say, over the NDIS, it does seem that they're just flattening the curve rather than increasing or decreasing the funding for NDIS.
Yeah, look, absolutely. The NDIS has, obviously, it's a very relatively new scheme, and the demand for service has really exponentially grown over the years. So trying to flatten the curve from 13.9% down to 8% is a huge ask. Yeah. And obviously that causes a lot of concern for a lot of families and participants as to how they're going to actually achieve that. And whilst they're saying flatten the curve, it still does make people very, very nervous when there are obvious ways that we feel as a community that could be looked at.
Yeah, you can tell how triggering that is for a community that is so reliant on these payments. You know that from your work with Spectrum Support, but you also know it deeply from your own personal situation as well. Tell us a bit more about what that evokes in people and yourself.
Look, it's I'm very thankful for the NDIS because there is no way that I could support my children without the funding that we get. And it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because prior to the NDIS, you could access services such as speech and OT for as little as $90 an hour. Now, providers are able to charge upwards of $480 an hour for that same service. So when a participant is provided funding of, say, $20,000, and they could have previously accessed 222 sessions in a year versus now 41 sessions, we have to start looking at who are the most vulnerable here, and these are the people on the scheme, not the providers. So it's a really, as a mum, it's a really difficult thing to manage. And then as somebody who trains law enforcement, seeing the relationships, it's really truly heartbreaking. We have to do better.
Yeah. You know, when you say managing, as a mum, managing it all, it's not just managing the kids, not just managing to try to get the support, but it's just managing how to get the support. That's one thing, and that is something that the AFR, this article from the AFR sort of talks about, how unwieldy the system is as well. So you know where to get the support, but getting to it is a whole different idea,
And it's really challenging for a lot of people because, you know, there are barriers other than just trying to access the scheme. So the scheme is there to support families, but accessing and filling out the paperwork is quite complex. And if you don't use the right terminology, and if you don't fill out the right paperwork, and if you don't access the right reports, then it affects the outcome. But on top of that, there are a lot of participants who also have disabled parents, or there are parents who have come from another country and English is not their primary language. And these barriers are things that we need to factor in too, because these people do require additional support, especially our most profoundly disabled. That's what the scheme was there to support in the first place.
So from your experience, both personally and professionally, what's the answer here to the funding questions and to the way the NDIS is structured?
I think the lens needs to be shifted on the suppliers for the time being. You know, it's a huge scheme. There are going to be teething problems when a new organisation comes into play. So a lot of improvements have been made. The $900 million that Bill Shorten has now committed is to support workers, to upskill them. It's to also reduce the amounts of times, as Kurt Fernley said, remove the amount of times that you have to prove yearly that you have a lifelong disability. You know, there are some improvements that are really coming in, but I think the lens needs to be shifted to the providers and not providing them a open checkbook.
Yeah.
We have to support our most vulnerable and our disabled. That's why this scheme was created.
Yeah. We can't ignore the fact that it is, of course, Mother's Day. And this next article, very quickly, the Daily Telly talks about how Mother's Day is more than just the chocolates and the flowers and the usual bathrobes and the mugs, of course, because you can show you appreciate your mum through acts of love.
Absolutely. There's nothing better than on Mother's Day having my little boys crawl into bed with me and just have a cuddle. They're still singing the Wiggles and we have those beautiful intimate moments. But, you know, between doing that, having a little bit of breakfast and watching a movie together, I think for me at this point, I would love to just have 2 hours by myself, a little bit of self-care, put a face mask on, put a hair mask, a glass of champagne, and that would be a lovely Mother's Day ending.
Yeah, I think that's very relatable. But I think the whole concept of Mother's Day has come a long way over the years, that there's this recognition that it's not just about one day, it's about showing that appreciation over the years, but also there's been an increasing recognition each year that Mother's Day is complicated and really difficult for some people as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, you've got a lot of people who, you know, have circumstances that make this day really challenging for them. And it's important to acknowledge those journeys. And it's equally important to acknowledge our journeys as mothers. And I love this day, and I love days of recognition, whether it's International Disability Day, Pride Day, Father's Day. I love these days because the world is so busy and the world is so chaotic, and it gives us something to look forward to, and it gives us that moment to say, hey, it's my day and I'm being acknowledged for some of the things that I do.
Well said. Kathrine Peereboom, it's great to have you on Weekend Breakfast and see you in person. Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day to you too.